Welcome to Matthew Felix On Air, people who create, people who make a difference, coming to you from Paris, France, my second show from Paris. And I could hardly be more happy to be back in Paris. I lived here several years ago, and I've spent a lot of time visiting, but I hadn't been back for, 4 or 5 years. I'm not sure how long it's been. So excited and happy to have the excuse to come back to Paris. And of course, the excuse was the invitation that I received from LitWings founder and today's guest, Erin Byrne, to participate in her LitWings Paris event. That happened last Thursday, April 11th, and as I mentioned in the past, each LitWings event has one photographer, one writer, and one filmmaker typically. I, of course, was the writer for this event, and the other attendees, other presenters included Ernest White II, host of the travel documentary series Fly Brother, which has just been greenlit by PBS to debut nationwide later this year. So it was really interesting to hear about that project. A award-winning photographer, Lona Merch, was also there, and she of course has been on this show and was just in San Francisco, so it was great to get to see her again and hear more about her work. Tony Alberto Rigatini is a poet, playwright, and screenwriter, as well as host of Spoken Word Paris, which I hope to do while I'm here, and which Erin is also going to do while she's here. So it was great to get to meet him. And we also had an update on the Creative Process exhibition, which I had mentioned on this show previously, and that was by Mia Funk, the founder of the exhibition, who will be my guest on next week's show. So clearly it's all very related, all interwoven. And because I just got to Paris, and because the only news I have is really related to LitWings, I don't have any other news for now. So, after this quick message from my sponsor, Wordspace Studios, I will be back with LitWings founder, Erin Byrne. A quick thanks to Wordspace Studios in San Francisco for sponsoring Matthew Felix On Air. Wordspace's mission is to bring together writers and thinkers of all ages and experiences. Wordspace will soon be offering creative writing workshops, a literary book club, and guided writing groups. And Workspace is already offering writing residencies. They are submission-based, and they provide writers with room and board for up to 1 month. To find out more, you can email info@wordspacesstudios.com. Erin Byrne is the author of Wings, Gifts of Art, Life, and Travel in France, editor of 2 Vignettes and Postcards series, one for Paris, one for Morocco, and she is the writer of the Storykeeper film. Erin's travel essays, poetry, fiction, and screenplays have won many awards, including 3 Grand Prize Solas Awards, the Foreword Indies Book of the Year, and an Accolade Award for film, as well as the Pinnacle Achievement Award. Erin has taught writing at Shakespeare and Company bookstore here in Paris, at Book Passage Sausalito, and on deep travel trips. Excuse me. As I also already mentioned, Erin is the founder and host of the LitWings events, 2 of which happen in Sausalito each year, and then 1 here in Paris. And she is travel writing curator for the Creative Process exhibition, which was launched at the Sorbonne and travels to the world's leading universities. Her screenplay Siesta is in pre-production in Spain, and she is working on a novel set in the Paris Ritz during the occupation. Welcome back, Erin.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Je t'en prie, merci d'être ici. So let's just jump right into things and talk about LitWings and the LitWings event that we just had,
okay,
which I thought went really well.
Yeah.
So what are just some of your impressions, and how are you feeling about it?
I loved it. First of all, I love the space, Café Autech. It's just the coolest cafe in Paris, I think, and they do cultural events every other Thursday. Just about, they have concerts, and they're from all over the world. So they have hosted 6 different events for me through the years. Yeah. We used to do a lot of kind of readings there from my Shakespeare and Company workshop, and then we did a practice run before we launched Vignettes and Postcards from Paris, and I did a concert there with Olivier Mage from my Wings book when that came out, and I also showed the Storykeeper film with these 2 guys, these friends of mine, and their film is called Portrait of a Bookstore as an Old Man. Yep. It's a film about George Whitman of Shakespeare and Company. So we had a film event there, and then we had our first LitWings Paris there last year. Oh, so last year was the first LitWings Paris. This is the second. Okay. Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah, because LitWings has been going on for 6 years, right? This is the third year. Sorry, 3 years. Yeah. But you just started the Paris one last year. Interesting. Yeah. And I'm doing 2 in Sausalito, and probably 1 in the city at Wordspace, actually, and then 1 in Paris. Yeah. Okay. So you'll be doing 4 a year? I think so. Okay. Yeah. Cranking it up, taking it up a notch. It's so fun. So it is fun, and
It's always interesting and just inspiring. But how and why did you start it?
I was talking to Lee Kravitz about my books and sort of like how to market my books. And he actually came up with the idea. And he said, Erin,
wow.
you just need to do an event that's really fun, that you think is really fun. And then you sort of have your books there. And so it's not the big, this is after I spent, 2 years promoting these books. And so he was like, what is your umbrella of interest? And it turns out that my umbrella of interest is writing, because I'm a writer and I love, writers, obviously. Filmmaking, because I'm sort of the accidental filmmaker. Mm-hmm. And then I am obsessed with photography. I can't take a picture to save my life. But as you know, when I'm in Paris, I have Henri Cartier-Bresson, the photographer, and Robert Doisneau appears. They're both dead, of course, but
we're gonna get to that.
Yeah. But anyway, and I have all these friends who are I'm just in awe of their photos. And so, my first event I did at the Book Passage in Sausalito, and I had Lee. I was like, okay, then you're going to be my writer.
Yeah.
And I just have people talk about their career path, their creative path, and then share one project. Mm-hmm. So I had Lee and Kathryn Carnell, the photographer, and Vanessa Coccini, who's a filmmaker that I met at a film festival, and she has a film called Get Together Girls. She's an Italian filmmaker, but she lives in LA, and her film is in Nairobi. So it was so much fun, and it ends up always being this kind of like everyone's story is different, but everybody's story is the same, in that they just talk about their creative path, and they're doing this one thing, and then this really strange opportunity comes along to do another thing, and they say yes to that, and then they find themselves like way over here, and then this other opportunity comes out of left field of something they never thought they would do, and they say yes, and then they're there. And so it's like kind of the mystical way that we all move along our creative path. Yeah. And I really noticed that the other night too, and so it's really fun, and it's always inspiring.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's one of the interesting things about, when you asked me to do it and when you said, here's how I kind of structure it. And of course I've been to multiple LitWings, but just that reminder, and I like that focus on what's your trajectory to date, and sort of tracing where you started and how you've meandered to where you are today. A lot of it being completely unexpected, doors opening when you don't expect them to, and where you expect it or how you expect them to. And so it's really interesting to hear how that happens to other people. Yeah. And like you said, and then you find there are certain common underlying forces at work, and themes at work. But it's really interesting to hear each. For example, Ernest said that he never intended to be on TV. Right. And just like I've said before, and I think I said this last 2 podcasts ago, I never intended to do a podcast, never intended to be on video, never intended to do my stage show. So that whole idea, I just love that whole idea. Well,
it helps me, it really inspires me, because, you hear these people, and when they're talking about their creative path, this opportunity comes along and they say yes, and they go do this. Well, usually for me, I say no. Like, this film, the Storykeeper film, like Roger, my filmmaker, was over in Spain. I work with this Dutch filmmaker, and he just said, I was going to interview Renee, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, but he just said, I'm coming to Paris right now, and we're doing this film. And I was like, no, I don't know, and so listening to people's stories and really reflecting on what's happened to me after I did that film helps me to say yes in a more gracious way.
Well, I mean, that's another really good point, and we may end up talking about LitWings the whole time, because that's another really good point, is that, I mean, you got an email from me this morning where I was not in the best place related to the work that I'm doing, and just a lot of technical issues and things I had. And just wondering, is it even worth it sometimes, right? When we have these lows, and maybe a book comes out and it doesn't get the reception or whatever. There's always all these ups and downs as part of the creative process and journey. And so when you have something like LitWings, it's really important, because it just reminds us that, again, this is also the commonalities, that we all go through these different periods, and it's not always easy. And sometimes the doors open, but sometimes we butt up against doors. And just to keep on trusting and moving forward, and
it's really fun.
And here we are. Okay, so here we are. Like I just said, but here being Paris, in addition to here doing the podcast. But tell me about, I know that you taught at Shakespeare and Company, but I don't really know exactly, I know we've touched on this really briefly in the past, but tell me how your relationship with Paris started.
Well,
like the first time?
The first time I came was 2005, actually. And do you want the surfacey thing or the deeper thing?
Somewhere in between.
Okay.
That's not the answer you wanted.
Well, I mean, the surfacey thing is that I came, and the first time I came,
We're gonna go deeper.
The beauty of this place with the architecture and the art, and just, I mean, even if you're served a café crème, it's beautiful. And that just blew me away. And I had taken French all the way through school. So I think we talked about this. I goofed off in French class all the time.
Right.
But that gave me license to speak in this kind of accent, exaggerated accent of my French teacher that we always made fun of.
Yeah.
And then I started meeting these people here who I just resonated with.
But wait a second, if I may. Because if you just started meeting people, does that imply that when you came, you were here for a while?
When I first came, I think I was here for a short period, and then I came back rather soon after that and did a travel writing and wine trip down to Bordeaux.
Mm-hmm. That you write about.
But then I stayed in Paris on either side of that. And then I think the next time I came back really soon after that was when I went to this writing workshop that Anna Pook was teaching at Shakespeare and Company.
And so that was your entree.
And got to know her, and then I just was coming back. It happened to be that I was starting to write then, and I was provided with all kinds of crazy things to write about here.
Yeah,
so.
And so then you were sort of hooked and felt that connection.
Yes.
So one of the things, or one of the results from both your meeting up with Anna Pook and Shakespeare and Company, and your feeling just so connected literarily here and just inspired here, was your Vignettes and Postcards from Paris book, the anthology. There are two books in that series. One, again, is from Morocco, which we're not going to focus on so much today, but just so that people know. And so tell us a little bit about that book and some of the themes and some of the different angles it takes, who's involved, and its relationship to your time at Shakespeare and Company. Okay,
well, I was there, and then Anna asked me to teach I think I taught a travel writing, like a one-night workshop as part of her longer workshop. And then the next time I came, she was pregnant. She was going to have a baby, and she said, will you teach the longer workshops? And there were 2, and I think there were 7 or 8 weeks, 2 nights a week, 2 entirely different groups, by the way, who we finally connected. But Anna and I then had always talked about putting together the writings of these writers. And so when I did this long workshop with them, part of my mantra with them was like, you know what? When you're writing this stuff, you need to get it published. And they were kind of, a lot of them were like, they had everything there was. They had inspiration. They knew how to edit. When I started challenging them, they went so deep, and they were able to get to the heart of their stories, and they were able to edit. But they just, when I started talking about publication, they really froze. Interesting. And so, Anna and I were like, okay, we're just going to do this book then. Yeah. And so the original book was, I think it had a long title. It was like Writings from the Evening Workshop at Shakespeare and Company bookstore, and it
Very
was
literal.
Yes, it was a smaller book. And then, do you want me to talk about how that became the current edition?
Sure.
Okay,
just
so
kind of high level. Sure.
It was a kind of a smaller book, but it won all these awards. The stories in it are luscious. And then Reputation Books, which is the publishing company of my agent, Kimberly Cameron, said, a few years later, they said, why don't we do a new edition of this book, and then we'll do a series, and you can do another one. And I was going to Morocco frequently then, so I was like, okay, I'll do Morocco. So the Morocco one was all stories about Morocco. The original Paris one was, many of the stories were about Paris, but not all.
Oh, really?
So I added 21 new stories and poems, and photos by Bill Rolfe, who's just an incredible photographer, sketches by Colette Hanahan, and there's 4 full-page sketches by Candace Rose Varden, which are just so detailed and intricate and beautiful. And there's a chapter by the spoken word poets of Paris, and stories by Alberto and those guys who I'm sure we'll talk about later. And Don George gave me Le Bon Vie in Paris, and Marcia de Sanctis gave me a story, and Kimberly Lovato, and
so there's a big variety.
21 new ones, and 2 poems by Billy Collins, which was I was so thrilled to have those.
Yeah.
So it came out, my twins, actually my triplets, but it came out at the same time as the Morocco book, the new one.
Right, the new one.
So, yeah.
And I just realized, for people who don't know, we're assuming that people know what Shakespeare and Company is. So can you just give us a little tidbit for people who might not already know?
Shakespeare and Company is a very famous bookstore. That was the original Shakespeare and Company was Sylvia Beach, and it was on Rue de l'Odéon. And she is the one who published Ulysses. It was such scandalous, and she published it. And then she left during the war, and the bookshop closed. And then after the war, George Whitman was an American, and he was there for the war, and he just ended up staying. And he had this apartment on Boulevard Saint-Michel.
Was he a soldier? You said he was for the war. Uh-huh.
And then he had this apartment on Boulevard Saint-Michel, and he just said all of his friends would come over and borrow his books.
Yeah. So
he opened this little bookshop down then. This is on Rue de la Boucherie. It's right across from Notre Dame. And that was 1951, I think, when it opened. So, Henry Miller and, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, obviously James Baldwin, all those guys, that's where they hung out. The first Shakespeare Company was kind of Hemingway and Fitzgerald and all those guys. And so this was kind of, he had her blessing, and I can't remember the whole story about how that went, but it's connected. Over. I mean, it's not like officially connected with the first one, but it's, and so George Whitman, I mean, he ran it from 1951 to 2011, I think, or 12 is when he, maybe January.
And he lived there.
He lived there in his little quirky little apartment, and his daughter Sylvia runs it now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay, and it's an institution still.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah. He would have tumbleweeds, he would call them, and they're usually younger people, and a lot of my friends were, and our friends were, like Kathryn Carnell is a tumbleweed, Phil Cousineau is a tumbleweed.
These are people blowing through town who can stay there.
They called them tumbleweeds, and he gave them a bed, which was basically a bench that they moved the books off of, and they had to work the cash register, and they had to read a book a day, and that was their room and board. A day? Yes, and that was a room and board. So they still have tumbleweeds there. Yeah. If you do a book event there, they're bustling around, serving wine and doing all this stuff. And
I guess a book a day isn't that much if you're working in the bookstore and you don't have a lot going on.
Yeah,
so you actually have time to read the book.
Yeah, but you'll go there and you'll see these younger people sort of buzzing around, and that's who they are, the tumbleweeds.
All right, so that's your first sort of output, if you will, which seems too sort of sterile a way of terming of calling it, from your time in Paris, Vignettes and Postcards, that collection. But then you also did do, we mentioned this a second ago in the intro, the Storykeeper film. Yes. And you just got done saying a second ago that your filmmaker sort of said, we're just doing this, and you were like, no, but you ended up doing it. Right. And the Storykeeper film won Best Documentary Short at 2013 at the 2013 Geneva Film Festival. It won the 2012 Accolade Award. It's been accepted and shown at lots and lots of festivals. So it was quite a success for something you didn't even want to do. Something that someone made you do.
The filmmaker was so awesome.
Okay, but tell us about the film.
Well, I had this story that was actually handed to me, and I had spent years doing research on the occupation of Paris. I just was kind of obsessed with this time period, and I didn't quite know why. And so everybody in Paris knew how I was fascinated with this. And so one day, one of my friends, Edouard Duval, said, "You know what? My uncle was in the Resistance, and I have this story that I've been wondering what to do with. I'm going to hand it to you. It's the account of this guy from Arkansas who was parachuted down into Paris, was hidden, and my uncle actually helped hide him. And you might want to write this up." So it's this unbelievable account of Kirby Cowan, this guy from Arkansas who the plane was, they were bombing the suburbs, and it was June of 1944, and the plane was hit near the escape hatch, so many of the parachutes went out, and 3 men went down with the plane. 3 survived and parachuted down. Others plunged to their death. And anyway, I got the story of Kirby who parachuted down, and Edouard Duval's uncle, Rene Duval, Kirby landed in this field where these teenage boys were out picnicking with their girlfriends, and they saw him, and the Germans then were looking for him. And so they hid him in a shed, gave him a change of clothes, took him over to this factory where one of their fathers worked. Well, the factory owner was Rene Duval, the uncle of Edouard, my friend. And he came out, and they hid Kirby in this big bin, and they wrote "unexploded bomb" on it. And the Germans came looking, and they just said, "No, there's nobody here."
Right.
Well, Rene came out. He drove Kirby to his home, which is on Boulevard Malesherbes, over by the Arc de Triomphe. And he kept him there. He drove him there and hid him there. In June of 1944, he would have been shot in the head for that. So he hid him, and then he took him by metro over to Sebastopol, Boulevard Sebastopol, 20 Boulevard Sebastopol, which is where Georges Prévost, a gendarme, was living with his sister Jeanette and her husband Jean Rocher. And they hid him for 2 weeks. He was there along with this other airman from Scotland. And then on their way, they were smuggling them out of Paris on their way out. They got caught. They were in the last train to Buchenwald, and then he was moved from prisoner of war camp to prisoner of war camp, and finally was liberated. Patton marched right in front of him and liberated this camp. And that it was a full year of his life. And then he returned to Arkansas. Right. So I had that story, and I read it, and I thought, this is a film. I didn't know anything about film.
So why? So that was going to be my next question. Why film versus the story?
When I read the story, I just could.
You saw it. It was so visual.
It was just, and actually now it's interesting to think about this, because now everything I write, I see like that. But at that point, I didn't have any experience with film, but a lot of people I knew did. And so I kept running into all these film people in these odd ways. And I happened to go to this writing workshop in the Jura Mountains, and that's where I met Roger van Beek Kachuin. He's Dutch. He's a filmmaker, and he and I have done, and we did the Storykeeper, and we did these 3 short films for Wings, and then we're working on this Siesta film in Spain. But then he said, "I want to film some of your stories." And I was like, "Okay, cool, whatever." And so then the next time I was in Paris, Edouard said, "You know what? There's this guy who collected all the stories of the crew." This guy was a little kid when that plane crashed in his neighborhood. And I said, "Really?" And so he gave me his email address, and his name's Rene Serolis. And he started writing me. He just mailed me these packages. And he was 7 years old. Yeah. And the plane crashed in his neighborhood. Yeah. 3 dead men in the plane. And it was that thing in childhood that just broke through his veil of innocence. And so he then, so he then, he went off, grew up, the liberation happened, but he always thought about those guys in the plane and the rest of the crew. Right. And he went off to, oh my God, his life. He went off and started a discotheque in Canada. Right. And then he went to Scotland and worked at the VIP lounge in the Galway airport, blah, blah. Anyway, he
He becomes the storykeeper.
He started coming back to Paris because he wanted to know what happened to the guys on the plane, because in his mind, they were the liberators. They were the heroes. And so he walked along the Seine to all the he was looking for magazines. He wrote letters to all the arrondissements asking for any information.
Right, trying to piece the story
June
back
22nd,
together.
1944, yeah. And what actually started him doing that was he came back one day to his old neighborhood. His brother was living nearby.
And he's living in Ireland, or
He
said,
was
or something?
Scotland.
Or Scotland. Uh-huh.
And he was living there, and this is what started his quest. He was visiting his brother, and he went out walking in his old neighborhood, and it was kind of a foggy day, and he was thinking about that plane crash, and he said, and he also, he's very down to earth. When he talks about this, he's just like gets this crazy sound in his voice. But he said he was walking along and he stopped, and the mist kind of cleared, and he was standing in front of a plaque that just said, 3 Americans died here in the plane crash. And he heard this voice in his head say, "Don't forget us." And that's what started him looking.
Perfect.
So he found out what happened to every single man on the plane.
Okay.
He had plaques put up all over Paris in their honor.
Yeah.
There were 3 that survived. One of them had died by that time because it was the 90s by the time he got all this put together. But he brought 2 survivors back to Paris. And they had ceremonies for them and celebrations for them. And he took them where they landed.
Yeah.
And
can people see the film right now? Because I know it was in festivals and stuff.
We had it out, Roger. We put it on when I launched Wings, but it still is being shown in, like, I think last year it was shown in Belgium and I think the Netherlands. And so when it's being shown, we can't really have it
publicly or online
out.
or
we never really got it organized to get it on a channel or anything yet. But I'll ask him, and you can put it on your thing. Like, we might be able to put it out for a week.
Because what is like 15 or 20 minutes, or is it longer?
It's
than
24
that?
minutes. It's a short.
It's almost a half an hour.
Yeah.
So but it's a great story.
Yeah. So we filmed it, and he so inspires me. I mean, this man Rene, he's just he was so generous, because what he did was he collected the stories. And then he offered the stories to the families of the fallen soldiers. So he went to them and said, "This is where your brother died."
Right. He gave them the pieces to the puzzle that they never had themselves, and that closure.
Yeah, and the serendipitous things and the synchronicities in this whole thing are just astounding.
All right.
Yeah.
Speaking of serendipities or synchronicities and serendipity, let's move on to Wings. So this is your book. This is one of your 3 books, rather. And this goes beyond Paris. So in Wings, Paris plays a big part, but you're actually traveling throughout France. So this sort of broadens the scope in that sense. So how would you? Ouch! I just bit my lip. How would you describe Wings, just at a very high level? Because we're going to go much deeper, but at a high level, how would you describe Wings?
I always say that Wings is about how I traveled through France with the ghosts of artists and other historical figures who shared with me their guides to living. Okay. And I had all these strange encounters. Okay. So, and it's also, like, in hindsight, it's a book about how, how I talked about earlier about the beauty, is here. And it was like, it's kind of what everyone does when they come to Paris. It's like, it's so beautiful, and oh my God, it's Paris,
Swept
blah, blah,
away.
blah. That book is really the trajectory of me discovering that what I needed was here.
I'm going to talk about that.
And that it wasn't necessarily the mystique of Paris.
Right. So hold that thought, because I love that aspect to the book, and we are going to get there. But first, let's start high level. Okay. Because at a high level, it is a travel book. At a high level.
Yes.
And you said in a 2013 interview.
Oh gosh.
Yes, I did a little research. With 3 Guys, 1 Book interview, you said, quote, "I avoid letting my identity as a travel writer, author, filmmaker, or teacher eclipse my quest as a traveler." Do you still feel that way? And if so, why?
Yes, of course, because, my identity in Wings is not the savvy travel writer. It's like the bumbling traveler who stumbled into all these weird situations.
Yeah.
And, but I also think that we get very aware of ourselves when we travel. I mean, I do it too, right? Like, here I am in Paris, here I am in Morocco, here I am in Brazil. But I try to be in the place. And I had this thing happen. This is not France related, but early on, we took our boys, my family, we went to Stonehenge. And I was like obsessed with getting the Christmas card picture at Stonehenge. And so I was like, all right, you guys stand here, da 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 da, here we are. We were going to have Merry Christmas from Stonehenge. And I looked, and this was in the age where you got the pictures back.
Yeah.
We got the pictures back, and I looked at the picture. Stonehenge was like a concrete corner behind my son's shoulder. And in that moment, I just was like, oh my God. Like that's what we do. And so I think for me, if I don't mindfully move myself smaller in the picture, like Savani was talking about in LitWings, the last LitWings, like big world, small people.
Right.
That. So anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Another, or something that I found interesting about the book and different about the book and appreciated about the book is how you directly engage the reader. You're very direct and very intentional about that, and that doesn't happen very often. And so I'm just going to give a couple examples. On the very first page, I think, this is a quote. "You are alone in the room, ensconced in a golden brown embrace. The scent of coffee nudges your blood to thrum, and you sense that something in this place is here just for you." Then you also say, the story elsewhere, still early though, the stories in this book, maybe this is the intro, the stories in this book are not meant to amuse or entertain, although sometimes they do both, but to call forth responses. This is how literature has worked its magic with me. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how it's related to Wings and why you did that in Wings?
Well, I mean, it's all that thing. We all have these places we travel where we feel this tweak. And we follow it, and we can discover these things. And so what I'm trying to do is sort of share like my adventures, having these things affect me and move me. And you have the person who loves Nepal and they always want to go back to Nepal, or they love Vietnam, or they want to go to South Korea. Every time they have a chance to travel, they go there. And so Wings is written from this philosophy of deeper, like going deeper and finding out why these places move us so much.
What about your specific choice, though? I'm still interested in this, which is in addition to what you just said. But like, for example, here's another quote. You're asking, you're confronting the reader. And this, again, to me is kind of different, right? But here's another quote. What is the source of the stories that make up your life? Right? And then here's another one. Well, no, actually, I'm just going to say that one for now. The other quote is a slightly different point. But so I'm just curious, you're thinking, because you could have written the stories and sort of had the reader draw.
I know what
those
you're
things.
asking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I believe very firmly in my reading and my writing is that you have to get to the universal. You have to get to the universal emotion, because there's really nothing that I do that is all that interesting unless it calls forth a response in you, unless you can read it. It's like your book, Porcelain Travels, right? People read it and they want to talk about their experiences. And so what I want people to do with Wings is read that book and think about the characters that touch them. And even like, I love this little story about Candace. Candace Rose Rodin. She read Wings, and she came over like the next time I saw her after she read it. She came over and she had, I think, the letters of Van Gogh. And she said, "Oh, Erin, you know, all of that stuff that Vincent had to say to you. And she showed me her book, and it had like colored bookmarks, just like a zillion color bookmarks. And she was like, this is what Vincent said to me. And so we spent the whole evening like sharing stories about what Vincent had to say to her and me. And that's what I want. That was for me when she did that. I was like, that's exactly what I want people to do.
Mission accomplished.
Yes. I don't want them to be thinking about me when they're reading the book.
Right.
I want
more
them
passive.
to
More active.
I want to introduce them to these characters and this place, but I also want them to then find their own places and characters.
Right. Right. I just like how you were so direct about that.
Yeah.
You know, because some people might get that on their own, but some people might not.
Well,
because
I'm trying
it's
to
easier just
invite
to read
people.
a book, but it's easier just to read a book, sort of.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So I like that you engage people that way. But you just mentioned, and I think maybe we've already mentioned this a couple times, but you just mentioned, you know, the characters you meet, the guides that come across our paths as we're traveling, and you mentioned very early in this conversation, you know, the Doisneau, or however you say his name, and Henri Cartier-Bresson, who are no longer with us in the material world. But
Neither is Vincent.
Neither is Vincent, but that they have been your guides. Yes. So I'm going to read a quote here. This again is from a different interview of yours. But you said, and also, you know, we did talk. So last time you were on the show, it was more focused. We were focused more on you had just come back from Spain, and at the time you were really focused on Duende. So again, there's this spirituality is big in lots of different ways in your work. But coming back to the guides idea, there's a quote from a 2013 interview from WriteOnline.com. You said, quote, I look for my magical guides, those figures of the past and present who ignite my life. They are varied and unexpected, and one can easily miss their appearance. And then I think this is, you said, the first time I went to the Tower of London, I felt visited by the spirit of Charles d'Orléans, a French noble I had read about who had been imprisoned for 25 years, and created exquisite illuminated manuscripts. Henri Cartier-Bresson reminded me, perhaps in a way no living person could, how to follow the inviting urge. Every story in this book reflects Henri's influence on me. So can you talk maybe in general about this idea of guides from the past coming into your present?
Yes.
And then let's get specific about Henri, because it seems like he's sort of your main guide, right? If you had to sort of characterize. So you have a quote, I think. Yeah.
This is the quote that opens the book, and this just says it better than I can. If what you are following, however, is your own true adventure, if it is something appropriate to your deep spiritual need or readiness, then magical guides will appear to help you. If you say, everyone's going on this trip this year and I'm going to, then no guides will appear. Your adventure has to be coming right out of your own interior. If you are ready for it, then doors will open where there were no doors before, and where there would not be doors for anyone else. And you must have courage. It's the call to adventure, which means there is no security, no rules. And that's Joseph Campbell. Yeah. And so my magical guides are not just famous people. They are many of the people you met the other night. You know, they're many of the writers that I met at Shakespeare and Company. They're people who I have met who have spoken to some kind of need in me that perhaps I wasn't even aware of when I met them, but it's that tweak. You know, when I was editing this, it's published by Traveler's Tales, and so Larry and I were editing it, and he just kept saying, I think the word tweak might be in the book once, but he was like, Erin, tweak, like it was a big joke, because when we were talking about it, we were using that word a lot. So follow the tweak. Yeah.
So some of the people, so I think it's interesting or great also that you just mentioned it's not just people from the past, it's not just figures from the past, it's also people from today, and yet going back to those people from the past on your path. Tell us about how Henri Cartier-Bresson, who is no longer with us, is your guide today, or has been your guide today, or was your guide while you were working on Wings in particular.
Well, I had this thing happen where I was staying in this apartment, and I hadn't even really heard who he was, but it was 3:30 a.m. and I heard this voice in my ear, and the voice said Henri Cartier-Bresson.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, and by this time I had been traveling and sort of following these tweaky threads. And so I sort of like went back to sleep. But when I woke up, I thought, oh God, I got to go find this guy's work.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's something weird going on here.
And you
right?
recognized the name?
I recognized the name. I knew he was a photographer. I just didn't, I had no idea.
Right.
And so I went up to his Fondation Cartier-Bresson, which is in Montparnasse. And none of his work was there. It was all this work. It was Duano. It was Robert Duano.
Mm-hmm.
It was all these photos by him, but they were really fabulous. And these guys were, they photographed in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And they were the magnum photographers.
A lot of iconic photographs that people would just
absolutely.
recognize. Yeah.
So I loved these photos by Duano. So I went back to my place, and I just kept, when I was touched very deeply by things, then I was just writing poems. And so I went back to this place and like wrote all these poems about Duano's work. And then, but I couldn't find Cartier-Bresson.
Interesting.
So the next morning I woke up really early. I tend to wake up early here, as we've discussed. But it was snowing, and I was standing at the window of my apartment, and I looked down, and there's this images shop, like of photos of like Picasso and photos of, these artists. Mm-hmm. And there was a big photo of this guy, and he was kind of leaning on his, like this, and looking up and smiling. And so I, just locked eyes with this photo and looked at this guy, and I was like, wow, who's that? It was snowing, da da da. Well, later on, I walked down there, and it was Robert Duano. Mm. And I was like, whoa. And so I just, the rest of the whole time on that trip, I was looking for Cartier-Bresson's work. I don't know. I went to the Maison Photography. I couldn't find anything. Like, I just was blocked from finding his work.
Which is strange.
And in the meantime, I have been encountering this message on a constant basis, and people kept saying it to me. And like, I have my tarot cards read by this Scottish gentleman, and he said, life is not an abstraction, miss. It's for the living. Don't think. Mm-hmm. And he kept saying, don't think. And all these people were like, stop thinking so much. And they were telling me this. Well, much, much later, I kept thinking of Cartier-Bresson, and I never had found his work. And
on it, so you leave Paris. You never succeed in finding his work.
Like, I just kind of gave up and got interested in Duano instead.
Yeah.
But then I kept thinking, I thought, okay, I'm going to write about this guy. So I did all this research, and his photos, it was so odd. It was like when I saw his work, which is so artistic. It's like the brain and the heart. His work is just geometrically perfect, artistically perfect, historically, like everything. I was primed for this moment when I saw his work, because I felt his work, like I felt it in my body. Viscerally. Mm-hmm. And then I was watching this interview with him, and he was talking about his decisive moment. It's quite a famous thing that he made famous, which is that moment when he clicked the shutter, and how he relied on his intuition. And and let me back up. When people were telling me to don't think, they were like, will you just let your life flow? So all these different people, the tarot card guy, was like, just let it flow. So I'm watching this interview with Charlie Rose, and Cartier-Bresson just says, I just let it emerge. And he leans forward and he just goes, don't think. And it was that moment where, we have these moments where like things just bounce off our brain. Right. And it was just like this moment where it really came into me. And it really, one of the things that I found here was kind of like a reigniting, like a reigniting of my authentic self. I know it sounds a little bit cliche and crazy, but also a reigniting of my own intuition in my life. And so that whole don't think I got it then. And I just looked at the way he worked. They called him a dragonfly on the streets of Paris because he had the handheld Leica. You know, they didn't have the handheld cameras before that. So he was able to just get all that street photography. And then there's also another story in Wings about how he traveled the world, and you know, he happened to be in all these places on the like he's in China on the eve of the revolution, like he's in India when Gandhi shot, you know, all this stuff. But the way he photographed Paris, when I found this book apropos de Paris of his photographs of Paris, I was really struck by how he photographed his home. And at the time I was living in Washington State. So the story, apropos de Paris, is me walking around Paris, and I'm so entranced by Paris. I'm writing, taking notes, writing about Paris. And he comes along, and he's like, this is how I photographed my home. And he kind of takes me around and shows me all these different famous photos by him. But then he says, there's these statues on Notre Dame that they are working on these statues right now, so they're covered up, and I think of them as his statues. I know he didn't, but this photograph, these statues on Notre Dame is just so incredible. So he says in the story, he's like, I made Notre Dame statues move. Now you do the same with Washington State. Your eyes have been opened by Paris, but now it's time for you to write about your home.
I'm going to read a conversation about this.
Oh, okay.
So on page 116, because it gets even a little more specific, because this is, we were going to go here. So he says to you, and so when we say he says to you, you're walking around Paris and you're hearing this, right? So he says to you, quote, it's easy to see foreign places and be charmed, but you must develop an eye for your home, which is what you're talking about. And then you say, that's easy for you to say, your home was Paris. And he says, but after I traveled to all these places you just mentioned, I had to rededicate my focus. I could easily have become blind to the familiar and let it become ordinary, which again is what he's teaching you. And then you say in the book, Henri reminded me of the manner in which I had written about my own home. The few pieces I penned had been about my desire to escape American culture after watching the Today Show and losing my patriotism during the Bush years. Years later, here in my home, cafes here do not often do not offer intricate tea glasses or 17th century ceiling beams. Every single crevice seemed to seep with raindrops, but I've just driven across Washington to see my son. I look out the window and I see freshly watered roots, and my eye is dazzled by the aching wonder of it all. And so he helps you to realize it's not about Paris. I mean, Paris can help you to bring that up, but it can be about anywhere.
It's about seeing.
Yeah, it's about seeing and being present, again, which sounds cliche, but is cliche because it's so true. So let's see, is there anything else about plays? Because that was, well, I guess the next thing I would want to go with that, the follow-up to that was going to be, you know, you talked about, so that's sort of where you get to. You get to realizing that it doesn't have to be, Paris isn't perfect or whatever, that you can get to a place where it's really about you and how you're relating with your surroundings and where you are. But I also like, though, still, before that, you say on page 28, we are magnetically pulled towards what or who we need, and that can often be a place. So tell us just a little bit about that, because I think that's so, and you did kind of touch on this before when you were saying some people feel just like Vietnam or Nepal, they feel this pull. So tell us a little bit about
Well, I mean, for me, you know, when I was little, and I write about this in the Winged Victory story, and that's why the book is called Wings. But when I was little, I was in my room writing stories and sketching all the time. When I was very, very young, I was the kind of serious little girl who saw everything and then asked endless questions. Well, I mean, I write about this in the story. Like in the 60s, that wasn't people's favorite thing for little girls to be being very cute was the thing, right?
Yeah.
So I essentially at 4 years old sort of adopted this persona of the frivolous, funny, cute, which I mean, there's maybe I have some elements of that, right? But I dropped my questioning side, the side of me that liked to discuss and argue and probe and question and I stopped writing.
Yeah.
So when I came here, I felt like I was meeting everybody I met was just obsessed with asking questions and talking about things and arguing about things, and like they were talking about writing and they were talking about me.
Mm-hmm.
And they were me.
And things you had bottled up way back when.
Well, I just sort of cast off my own self in a way. And so I mean, this happened with Winged Victory as like my quintessential magical guide, because there's something about that statue when she doesn't have arms or a head, but the way she stands on that ship, it just sizzles with confidence and authenticity. This is a woman who knows who she is, and when I saw her, it challenged me, and I realized that I didn't really know who I was, and I realized, whoa, I'm not really authentic. Like I was sort of gotten away from who I was.
I have to jump in here because one of the things I love about your not being authentic at that point in your life, before you started a lot of what we're talking about here, is I felt like it was really courageous and helpful to the reader. Mm-hmm. You're not afraid in the book to sort of not make fun of yourself, but to admit, well, I thought I had it all going on. There are a few different circumstances where you're like, well, I
get humbled many times.
And then you get humbled. That's it. Yeah. You let yourself get humbled. But there were times when I would read not knowing that you were about to get humbled.
Right.
And I would kind of think, well, she's a little full of herself. And then on the next page, you have this water in your face or whatever, and then you have the growth that comes from that.
Right.
And I felt totally, you had sucked me in and fooled me.
Right.
Mission accomplished multiple times. So I loved that you, again, I feel like that's somewhat courageous and humility there to admit.
I mean, that's one thing, like our travel writing tribe, that's one thing we all know.
Yeah.
Is that it's like a series of...
Well, the first time you were on my show, or the second time you were on my... I think when you interviewed me, and I just loved
and
this
I didn't know I was going to be on film.
And you didn't know you were going to be on film, which was your fault, not mine. But no, we were talking about Morocco, and you said how it just flattened you.
It did.
And I just love that way of saying it. I was like, I can relate to that. But before we move too quickly, because there's another thing that really resonated for me, related to Winged Victory, the statue. Mm-hmm. And why you feel such a connection with her, if you will, is because I'm going to read another quote here from I think this is from your introduction. Quote, "The surprise was that each time I returned home from these different places in your travels, I felt reconfigured." And you draw a beautiful parallel and a really telling parallel to the fact that, so you're feeling reconfigured. You go to these places and you feel just chopped up and whatever. But then you come home and it sort of comes back together in your new reconfigured self. But Winged Victory, they've been putting her back together. So there's a nice parallel between, because can you just tell people a little bit about that?
They found her thumb in a drawer in Vienna, and they just like have pieced together pieces of her. And then also I kind of get into it when she was restored, how when she was restored, it coincided with obviously not the conclusion of my experience in France, but the conclusion of that part. So it kind of draws a parallel. I draw a parallel between that.
And then she gets refurbished.
Yes, she gets. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Let me jump ahead here. Okay, so I guess my next question is, as we're sort of coming to the end here, but I'm curious because I think we've talked about this before, both probably on previous online chats and offline, is, you know, I always say that our relation, and I know I'm not the only one who says this, but our relationships with places are very much like our relationships with people. And at the end of Wings, Winged Victory tells you, hey, you're done here in France for now.
Yeah.
Go to Spain, and you sort of have this emotional reaction, like, wait, you know, you're kicking me out, so to speak, to oversimplify. And so now that you're coming back, you are coming full circle, because you're working on a novel that takes place here. So tell me about how your relationship with Paris and France has evolved, because you went into exile. Now you're coming back. How has your relationship with Paris and France again?
It's interesting because I kind of feel like I'm coming back to the place where I grew up. And for a very long time, I had that thing that maybe we have when we find the place that so resonates with us, and we are in Paris, we are in France, and then everything is going to just be, you know, pieced together. Everything is going to be, all this stuff's going to happen to us. Well, I mean, instead what happens to me is like I fall on my head and I like, you know, get really sick, and I, you know, like there's disasters, blah, blah. So I suppose you could say that by now I'm here and I'm working on this Illuminations book, and I'm walking around with I'm having lunch with my characters who are now my magical guides. But, you know, like I no longer expect wonderful, crazy, wild things like that event the other night I thought was. But I'm not, it's Paris. You know, like I still love it, but it's got ups and downs. You can't take the metro on Saturdays
because the way you did earlier.
I don't think so at all.
Because you have more of an experience.
No, but I still love it. Like, you know what?
But you can love it without idealizing it. I love it, but I also know that it's so crazy, it drives me crazy, and the cigarette smoke drives me crazy, and there's a lot that I don't like about it because I don't idealize it because I spent enough time here, but that doesn't mean I don't love it.
I still, though,
again, like our relationships with people.
When I first came here, I had this sensation, and I could hear a click. It was like I was a puzzle piece clicking into place. And I still hear the click and feel that every time I come here.
Nice validation.
I don't know. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, a lot of it doesn't make sense, and that's the point. Right? It's not about necessarily making sense.
So I like, when I ask people about their travels, I like to ask them what surprises them. I like to ask them, when I work with writers, I like to get them to evoke an image and an impression, but then I start, mostly when I work with writers, I just ask them questions to try to get to the connection between the place and them, because it's not always easy to start talking to people about that, how they can make those connections. And,
So speaking of your current connections with your new characters, with your new book, and this next phase of your relationship with Paris, tell us about the novel, so far as you want to share.
Well, it's called Illuminations, a novel of resistance in occupied Paris, and it's about a resistance cell who is plotting to poison Ermin Goering, who's living at the Hotel Ritz.
And who is he, for people who don't know?
He's the German general who was the Reichsmarschall, And he basically looted the art of France to an incredible degree. And so anyway, that's what I don't want to really go into it, but it has some characters from the Storykeeper film, and basically I'm just like going around having lunch with my characters, and they're waking me up early.
And so, but you're including historical figures.
Oh yeah, Coco Chanel and a lot of figures from France at that time, and there were a lot of things that happened in Hotel Ritz at that time that were really fascinating.
And so why that time for this next book? What is it about that time that
I think it's the character Jeanette Rocher, who lived at 20 Boulevard Sebastopol with her brother George, who was the gendarme, and her husband.
Are these historical figures, or these are just your characters?
They're real characters in my film, in the Storykeeper film.
Oh, they're in the Storykeeper film. Okay.
The guy who took Kirby, the guy from Arkansas, to his apartment over by Arc de Triomphe took him over to Boulevard Sebastopol, and he was hidden there for 2 weeks. I have all of his writings from that time. And one of the things he said in his writing was, we would sit around the table and drink cognac and talk until late. Yeah. And I just always was thinking of Jeanette, because she was the one who had made the dinner, and I always wanted to know more about her. Yeah. So I'm writing the book to learn more about her.
All right, I love it. And do we know how far along you are in that process?
I'm almost halfway through the book.
Okay.
I just worked with my editor, and I'm sort of on a roll here. Right, so it's a lot of research.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Historical fiction.
Yeah, but it's fun, and I've already coincidentally done most of the research, right? When I was obsessed with the time period, and I didn't know why. Right. So
fantastic. All right, we're looking forward to that.
Yeah.
What is upcoming for you? So in May, there's a panel presentation of Vignettes and Postcards of Paris at Commonwealth Club in San Francisco.
Club, yes.
I didn't get the date.
It's the 28th.
Oh, I did. Yeah.
Well, first, before that, I have the spoken word.
Spoken word here.
Spoken word. I'm the guest writer at Spoken Word.
And I'm going to be
on the 22nd.
Yep.
And I'm really excited because I absolutely love doing readings here in Paris, because some of the stories in Wings are they're a stretch for the American writer who doesn't like surrealism or So I'm gonna read the craziest chapter in Wings.
So you're reading from Wings.
Yeah. And so that's the 22nd. Then,
which is what day? That's a Sunday.
April 22nd, Monday night at Au Chat Noir at Spoken Word Paris. You can go, and my God, if you're in Paris, you got to go to this. You just go. You go at 8. You sign up. You can read for 5 minutes, and then I think I'm reading for a little bit longer than that. But yeah. So and then actually one of my writers from Shakespeare and Company is going to the States, and she's going to do a residency at Word Space Studios.
Okay, excellent.
So that's really exciting. Patricia Rarig, she's just a fantastic writer.
Shout out to Word Space Studios.
Yes,
excellent.
And
great. So I'll get to meet her.
She'll be there in May, and then we have this event at the Commonwealth Club, and Kathryn Carnell. Actually, in this anthology, in the new edition, she's a photographer, but she and I had always met her when I was here. We would go for dinner, and she would tell me stories about, because her father, Stanley Carnell, wrote Paris in the 50s, and she spent time here growing up. Yeah. And she was also a tumbleweed at Shakespeare and Co. And so she always told me these stories about her being here, and I was like, okay, you want to write this story? Yeah. And so she wrote this fabulous story. It's called A Very Long Engagement. My Very Long Engagement with Paris. So she's going to be there, and Marcia de Sanctis is coming from the East Coast to read her story, and Cara Black is going to join us, and she's going to read one of Billy Collins' poems.
And she was just on that show.
Yes, and she has a book coming out really soon after, and she's also doing a tour here in May.
She's doing a tour, a guided tour.
Yes,
yeah. So, all right, lots of Paris going on.
Yeah.
And then the next LitWings is in September.
The next LitWings is September 25th, and I'm actually Kara is going to be my writer, and Matthew, you are going to be on talking about your podcast.
I am.
Which, you're like the multi-talented.
Wait, why would I be a filmmaker?
Because you should see, where's the camera? You should see his studio here in this place. It's just amazing. You are a total filmmaker. Yeah. So, and then I'm not sure the filmmaker, it's possible that Ernest White, we were talking about it, and I'll have him another time if he can't do it, but he was, because he's just moving to the Bay Area.
He's got a new PBS show.
Yeah.
And he's local, and
yes.
now, and
yes.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, yeah.
All right. Erin, we are out of time.
Okay.
We could keep talking, obviously.
we
don't
totally
have any
can.
problem
We
talking,
can.
But yeah. No, we can't, because we're already at about an hour and 15.
We can off camera.
Let's keep talking off camera. Let's definitely keep talking off camera. Okay, so I just want to shout out the links here. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you again. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me here.
Oh,
Thanks for giving me an
yeah.
excuse to come to
You
Paris.
were fabulous at the event, by the
Thank
way.
you.
Everyone
Thank you.
loved you.
Maybe I'll if I get around to editing, maybe I'll include a couple clips
Oh,
of
yeah,
the
it'd be
events
fun.
in the podcast,
Yeah.
the video version. Well, both
Yeah, it was
both
great.
versions of the
And
podcast.
I will speak to Roger and see if we can get that film up for a couple weeks
Sure.
so your
That'd be great.
viewers
And we'll
can
post the link.
find it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so the links to check out all of Erin's work, which is obviously vast and varied, is e-byrne, BYRNE.com. You can also check out, she's, as I mentioned in her intro, working on the Creative Process exhibition, which Mia will be on next week, but creativeprocess.info for information about
Forgot
that.
to talk about that.
No, we didn't forget.
We should
What
mention
are
the
you
film.
saying? What would you like to
We
say,
forgot.
Erin?
Sorry, I know it's rude to interrupt.
It's rude to interrupt the close of the
I
podcast.
wanted to add
Yes.
the 3 short films we did in Paris related to the Wings book.
what
They're
would
on
you like to
my.
add
If they go to my
very
website,
quickly?
if they go to my website, they can just scroll down the books page and find these films.
Okay, so
They're
there
really
are
good.
there are 3 short films related to the Wings book on her website.
Je suis désolée.
Tu dois être désolé. Okay, I'm taking you out of the camera again. So
Okay.
say goodbye,
Au revoir, au
everyone.
revoir.
Say goodbye. Okay, no more interruptions.
Okay.
That's all for
Sorry.
today. Thanks again to my guest, author, filmmaker, and LitWings founder, Erin Byrne. Thanks also to WordSpace Studios, who we just gave the shout out to, for hosting me when I'm in San Francisco, which of course is most of the time. They are at wordspacesstudios.com. Next week, Mia Funk will be here. Thanks again for watching and listening. If you like the show, please share on social media, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you watch or listen. It really helps, and I really appreciate it. For more about me, my website is matthewfelix.com, and links to my social media, books, podcasts, and all the rest can be found there. If you have any comments, ideas for the show, or just want to say hello, I can be reached at felixonair@matthewfelix.com. Thanks again for watching, and have a great week.